I didn't realize I was walking into an erasure until the frosting hit my chest.
It was a Saturday in downtown Chicago, in a ballroom that smelled like money and peonies. Chandeliers glittered the way people do when they're sure the night belongs to them. I had pressed my navy dress myself, the one that still fit after the heart surgery, the one I bought secondhand and hemmed so carefully you'd think I was stitching hope back into the seams. I'm Evelyn May Parker, mother, widow, and these days, everybody's Grandma Evie, whether they're blood or just the neighborhood kids who know where to come for a warm biscuit and a cool-down ear. I'd taken exactly 2 steps into the hall when the bride, Sloane, turned toward me with a smile so sharp it could have sliced the fondant off her cake. She lifted her voice high enough to ride the music. "Get out of here," she sang, like a toast twisted into a knife. "A witch like you doesn't deserve to be at my wedding." The room split. Gasps on one side, giggles on the other, cell phones half lowered like they couldn't decide between decency and content. Before I could answer, before my son, Jackson, could blink, Sloane scooped a perfect triangle of vanilla cake and sent it sailing. The slice hit square over my heart, lemon filling and white icing sliding down like an insult that knew my name. I did what I've always done when life throws something sticky at me. I went still. You learn a kind of stillness growing up black on the South Side, young and stubborn, with a baby and a bus pass and a list of bills taller than the Sears Tower. You learn not to flinch when the world tests your balance. You learn that silence can sound like thunder if you let it sit long enough. No one moved. Not the bridesmaids in their oyster silk, not the groomsmen with their practice grins, not even my son, my baby who once cried because his shoes had holes and I wrapped his feet in grocery bags to get him to school dry. He looked at the floor. That hurt in a way cake never could. I dabbed the icing with a napkin and stood a little taller. I have always been a small woman, but posture can be a kind of protest. Somebody near the signature cocktail station whispered, "She really should have stayed home." Another voice floated up, airy as meringue. "Look at that dress. The nerve." That's the funny thing about rooms like this, rooms where the budget could fix a dozen broken porches in my neighborhood. They always pretend to be about love, but they have a way of magnifying whatever you brought in your chest. If you came hungry for kindness, you'll find it. If you came hungry for cruelty, you'll feed a crowd. I looked at my son. He looked away. And I remembered. I remembered washing his shirts in the sink when I couldn't afford quarters for the laundromat. I remembered counting tips at the kitchen table, stretching $10 across 7 days like I was a magician with a half-empty hat. I remembered the winter the heat went out and we turned the oven on low, opening the door and huddling by it like it was a fireplace nobody else had the imagination to see. I remembered selling my mama's brooch so I could buy him cleats for tryouts. Jackson scored 2 goals that season and told me it felt like flying. I told him that's what happens when people believe in you hard enough to hurt. Years pass. Boys become men. Men choose wives. And sometimes, somewhere between the rehearsal dinner and the vow cards, they forget who taught them how to lace their shoes. I wasn't on the program. I wasn't on the slideshow. My name was written on a place card that might as well have been a warning label, Evie, kitchen door. Tucked behind a potted fern near a swinging entrance, I could feel the heat from the line cooks each time the door slapped open. I smiled anyway. I came for a beginning. I'm a grandmother, I live for beginnings. But endings have a way of pretending they're the start of something. The music recovered first, like a DJ who decided discomfort wasn't part of the set list. People returned to their plates, scooping risotto with the quiet urgency of those relieved the spectacle had moved on. Sloane, satisfied, lifted her champagne and turned her attention back to the photographer. Jackson put his arm around her waist like a man rearranging furniture he didn't choose but has to live with. I sat. I smoothed my dress. I checked my phone because it gave me something to do besides cry. A text from my granddaughter Amaya blinked up at me. She was at the kids' table near the back. Grandma, do you want a napkin? I texted back a heart and told her I was fine. Kids don't need to carry what grown folks drop. I felt like a ghost haunting a party I paid for with 1,000 small kindnesses no one could see. Not long after Cakegate, the best man stood up to give a toast full of college memories and crypto jokes. People laughed. I clapped politely. When the microphone passed near me, it paused for a breath. The MC glanced my way like he wasn't sure if I was decoration or danger. I smiled. He kept moving. The rest of the night unfurled itself with the casual cruelty of people rushing past a woman on the sidewalk who has fallen. Nobody means to be bad, they're just busy being seen. I left early. I told myself it was because my legs were swelling, my doctor warned me about that. But really, I left because I know the difference between being invited and being welcomed. One is a name on a list. The other is a hand on your back guiding you to a seat that's been warmed by care. Back home, in the quiet kitchen where the refrigerator hums like an old friend, I made tea I never drank and opened the drawer I always open when I need to remember who I am. Inside is a wooden box my husband carved before the accident. On top of the folded keepsakes and faded photos sits an envelope the color of cream. The wax seal, pressed with a tiny anchor, has cracked with age but holds its shape like a stubborn memory. 1981, my wedding invitation. Handmade with pressed hydrangea and ink I learned to lay down in loops and patience. Sloan once saw it and laughed, said it smelled like a thrift store. Jackson teased that maybe I wanted it framed next to their fancy letterpress invites. When I offered to bring it to the planning brunch, Sloan said, "We're doing a minimalist vibe, Evie. Let's not bring clutter." They didn't understand what I was trying to give them. It wasn't paper. It was a blueprint, how to make a life when all you've got is belief and a glue stick. After my husband died, my church and 2 neighbors kept me from sinking. We made casseroles. We fixed power strips. We scraped by. A year later, with a small settlement and a stubborn streak, I helped fund a community center on 71st called Anchor Hall. We put our backs into it because we were tired of funerals being the only time the whole block gathered. I insisted on 3 things: free after-school tutoring, a weekly pantry, and a line in the founding documents that nobody but a lawyer and a widow would think about. The Hearthlight Trust, that's what my husband used to call our porch light, would hold a silent, renewable stake in Anchor Hall. Not to profit, but to protect. The founding patron, me, though I kept it quiet, would retain an emergency override on critical systems during private events if honor conditions were breached, things like hate speech, physical humiliation, or elder abuse. The codicil was buried behind legalese and good intentions. It lived in 2 places, a notarized file in a law office on 63rd and a single physical verification card that could wake the system and ask, is the person who helped build this house being treated like she belongs in it? That card looked like an invitation, because in my bones I believe that's what power should feel like, not a threat, an invitation to do right. I never meant to use it. For 30-something years, it slept. Baby showers, quinceañeras, repasts, wedding receptions, Anchor Hall held them all, and the card stayed in my drawer, soft with time and thumbprints. Every once in a while, when the world gave me an especially ugly day, I'd take it out and remember I wasn't helpless. Then I'd put it away again, because being able to do a thing doesn't mean you should. But sometimes you must. Sometimes that's the only way to keep a porch light burning for everybody else. I set the old invitation beside the verification card and looked at them both. Past and present. Proof and promise. 2 halves of the same spine. They had rented Anchor Hall for the reception because it was convenient and had great bones with a modern face, Sloan said after a site visit. She loved the exposed brick backdrops for photos, the uplighting menu, the built-in projector. She never asked about the building's name. She never read the plaque hidden beside the coat closet, the one my church kids polished every spring. Anchor Hall, for beginnings worth protecting. I had kept my name off that plaque. I wanted Jackson to grow up generous because his mother was, not grasping because she bragged. Still, as I sat with the envelope and the card, I thought about the cake sliding down my dress and how Jackson had refused to meet my eyes. I thought about being seated by the kitchen door. I thought about the muted laughter when Sloane put my calls on speaker, about the day I brought over an apple crumble, the birthday favorite he once asked me to bake every year, and she said, with a polite grimace, "We're not really doing sugar," then took a picture for her followers and tossed it in the trash when she thought I wasn't looking. Humiliation layered on humiliation until even a patient woman can't stack it any higher. I didn't sleep. I sat with the card until the sun seeped through the blinds and painted the table in hopeful stripes. At 8, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and dialed my lawyer, Mr. Hobbs, who eats too many jelly donuts but knows how to hide a fortress in a flower bed. "Evie," he said, voice already bracing. "You never call on a Sunday." "I'm cashing in a safeguard," I said, tracing the tiny anchor in the wax. "Hearthlight clause. Event override." He didn't ask me why. Good lawyers are also good grandsons when you're old enough to claim people that way. "You'll need the card," he said. "Show it to the event manager. The system will pause and request your validation. Then you decide." My hand paused over the envelope. "What if, I don't want vengeance, Hobbs? I want respect." "Then give them a chance to choose it," he said. "The clause doesn't punish. It invites honor. You wrote it that way." "I did," I said softly. After I hung up, I pulled on a soft cardigan and walked out to the little backyard I've tended for 20 years. The city was still yawning. Buses brushed the curb like big, friendly cows. The rosemary I coaxed through Chicago winters carried a bite. I cut a sprig, slipped it into my purse next to the card. My grandmother taught me to carry something living into hard rooms. To remind yourself what you're trying to protect. At noon, I took the 28 bus back to Anchor Hall. Sundays in that neighborhood always look like resurrection, pressed shirts, heavy cologne, laughter at the corner where the barbershop makes even bad news sound like a minor inconvenience. I walked into the lobby, nodded at the security guard whose mama I used to watch when she stayed late at the clinic, and followed the thrum of bass and bright voices toward the ballroom. The reception was in full glitter. Photographers like dragonflies, darting after whatever shimmered. The DJ kept a steady drum on the dance floor while the planner called cues like a stage manager halfway through a Broadway run. Sloane glided. She is very good at gliding. Jackson trailed a half step behind, smiling the careful smile of a man who knows he can't afford a mistake. Not in that suit, not in this crowd. I could have walked straight to my folding chair by the kitchen door and disappeared. But standing by that fern the night before felt like letting somebody turn my life into a cautionary tale. I didn't survive this long to be a footnote. So I walked to the edge of the stage, waited until the MC finished his joke about in-laws and lawn care, and lifted my hand. He faltered, blinking, then leaned down with the mic half hidden, as if we were conspiring. "Mrs. Parker," I said. "Evelyn Parker. People call me Grandma Evie." "Grandma Evie," he repeated with relief, because calling someone grandma is a shortcut to treating them like a person. "Can I help you?" "You can read this," I said, and placed the envelope, the one that didn't look like power, into his palm. He looked at the seal. He looked at me. He broke it. Things in that room began to shift before he even spoke. Energy knows when truth is about to get a microphone. "This," he read slowly, like the words had weight, "is a founding patron verification for Anchor Hall, issued by the Hearthlight Trust. It states that, upon presentation during a private event, venue systems will pause until the founding patron is verified and honor conditions are affirmed." The DJ's bass thudded one more time and stopped as if it ran into a wall. The lights did a slow blink, then held steady. On the perimeter screens, the slideshow of Sloane and Jackson's engagement photos froze mid-sparkle. A hush poured across the tables. The planner, sleek black headset, clipboard clutched like a shield, sprinted toward the stage, whispering furious questions into a mic that wasn't connected to common sense. Sloane's smile thinned. Jackson's eyes finally found mine. The MC looked to me, palms up. "Ma'am, what do you want to do?" I took the microphone. My voice didn't tremble. When you spend a lifetime speaking softly in rooms that ignore you, your steadiness becomes its own thunder. "I want the truth to come out," I said. "And I want this family to choose respect while there's still time." On the screens, the slideshow blinked to black. A blueprint rose in its place, Anchor Hall's skeletal lines in white. A tiny anchor pulsed near the foundation. Then a second image, a brushed steel panel by the east hallway coat closet, engraved in small, neat letters. Hearthlight Trust, founding patron, E. M. Parker. People turned their heads like the room had secrets and they were finally allowed to see them. Sloane's voice broke the quiet first. "This is insane," she said, brittle with offense. "She's hijacking my day." "No," I said, surprised at how gentle I felt. "I am protecting the ground your day stands on." The system tone chimed, a soft, even sound, like a bell that refuses to gossip. "Awaiting founding patron honor verification," it said. "Please present conditions." I looked around the room. There were people I loved in those chairs, even the ones who didn't know what to do with me. There were kids watching from the back, their small eyes trying to understand where dignity lives and who gets to keep it. I raised the mic again. "Last night," I said, glancing down at the faint, lemon-yellow stain that wouldn't quite come out, "someone threw cake at a grandmother. Today, I'm asking the hosts to acknowledge it, to apologize, and to promise better. That's all. An apology, and the music comes back. Or not, and the house I helped build will not be used to humiliate the people who made it possible." The room held its breath. Sloane opened her mouth. Jackson closed his eyes. Somewhere in the back, my granddaughter Amaya stood up, a napkin clutched in her small fist like a flag, and took one step forward. "And that's where I'll leave you, for now. Because every family has a moment when it decides what kind of story it wants to be, and ours had just arrived, square in the middle of a Chicago ballroom with the lights waiting for an answer. The ballroom was a living photograph, 200 people frozen mid-breath, mid-laugh, mid-gossip, while the speakers hummed with the suspended sentence. "Awaiting founding patron honor verification." Sloane's perfect smile cracked. She clutched Jackson's arm like he was a railing on a ship going down. "My son, my baby boy who once begged me for extra pancakes because it was the only sweetness we could afford, looked like a man standing in quicksand." His lips parted but no words came. The MC still held the microphone, staring at me as though he'd accidentally woken a ghost from the walls. "Ma'am," he whispered into the mic, forgetting it was live. His voice echoed across the room. What does this mean?" I took the microphone gently. The weight of it was nothing compared to the weight of my years. "It means," I said slowly, "that this hall was built to be a place of respect. And when respect is broken, it waits for someone to repair it." On the big screens behind me, the engagement slideshow flickered off. A new feed snapped on, grainy black and white security footage from the previous night. Gasps shot across the ballroom like sparks. There I was, stepping into the reception, smoothing my navy dress. There was Sloane, whispering to her bridesmaid, "Watch this." The crowd hushed, leaning forward. The footage rolled, her dramatic stumble, the cake slice lifted like a weapon, flung with a perfect aim. Then the audio, her voice, sharp and unrepentant, "She doesn't belong here. Let's make her regret showing up." The ballroom shook with silence. You could hear the ice melting in champagne glasses. Sloane's face went the color of spoiled milk. That's taken out of context, she shouted, though everyone had heard it plain. It was a joke. A murmur rose from the guests. Not polite chuckles this time, anger, dismay, whispers of, humiliating an elder, disgraceful, how could she? I stood steady. Respect, I said again, is not optional. It is the condition of this house. The system's voice chimed once more, founding patron verification, pending acknowledgement of breach. Hosts must respond. Jackson's head bowed. My son looked smaller than he ever had, his broad shoulders hunched, his expensive suit now a cage instead of a crown. His bride tugged his sleeve, hissing, say something. End this. It's my wedding, not hers. And for one fragile second, I saw him hesitate between two worlds, the easy one, where silence is cheaper, and the right one, where truth costs everything. But silence won. He did not speak. So I did. I asked for an apology, I told the crowd, voice calm but carrying like it had been waiting its whole life for this room. Not to me only, but to what this moment should have been. A beginning, not a battleground. Without it, this event cannot continue. The planner scurried to the stage, headset bouncing, clipboard trembling. Mrs. Parker, Grandma Evie, if we could just reset, get the music back. No reset without respect, the system replied flatly, as if it could hear me. Honor verification pending. The DJ shrugged helplessly, his hands hovering over the mixer. Guests fidgeted in their seats, some glaring at Sloane, others staring at Jackson with something between pity and contempt. It was Amaya, my granddaughter, just 12 years old, who broke the tension. She stepped forward, her small shoulders squared, napkin clutched like a banner. I'll say it, she piped up, voice trembling but fierce. Grandma deserves respect. What you did was wrong. And I'm sorry, for them. The room exhaled in one long gasp. A child had spoken where grown men failed. The system chimed, honor verification fulfilled by proxy acknowledgement. Systems restoring. The chandeliers brightened. The music stumbled back to life. The slideshow flickered off entirely, replaced by a still image of the plaque by the coat closet, Anchor Hall, for beginnings worth protecting. Founding patron, E.M. Parker. Applause broke out, not for the couple, but for Amaya. Guests clapped, some stood, a few even whistled. Elders nodded in satisfaction, murmuring, that child was raised right. Sloane's face hardened, her mascara smudging into a mask of rage. You ruined my wedding, you bitter old witch, she screeched, tears smearing down her cheeks. I looked at her, not with anger, but with the kind of quiet certainty only years can give. No, I said. You ruined it the moment you mistook cruelty for entertainment. Her mother rose from the front table, silk lavender dress shimmering under the lights. Her voice, sharp with fury, cut through the room. You let us sign a 6-figure catering contract for a venue you didn't even control, she barked at Jackson. And then you let your fiancé humiliate the very woman who holds the keys? What kind of man are you raising, Marlene? Jackson's lips trembled. He had no answer. One of my late husband's brothers stood then, an old uncle with a cane but a spine made of steel. He jabbed the cane at the air. That woman, he said, pointing at me, is the root of this family. And you let them treat her like a stray dog? Shame on you, Jackson. The murmurs grew louder, discontent swelling into indignation. Guests began pushing back chairs. Some slipped out. Others marched past me with a respectful nod. One elderly woman pressed a tissue into my hand. Thank you, she whispered. And there it was. The unraveling. Sloane ripped off her veil, hurled it to the floor. Cancel the videographer. Delete every photo. This is not the legacy I want my children to see. But it was too late. Phones were already buzzing, posts were already live. Hashtags were forming, hashtag safe ground truth, hashtag respect grandma, hashtag cake justice. I turned to Jackson one last time. My son's eyes were wide, desperate, full of panic. Mom, please, he whispered. Please don't leave. We can fix this. Just let it go. I raised my hand, not in anger, but in finality. Not today. I handed the microphone back to the MC. Play the music for the ones who still want to dance, I said softly. But I won't be part of this farce. And with that, I walked off the stage, Amaya at my side, her small hand gripping mine like a lifeline. Behind us, chaos bloomed, Sloane's sobs, Jackson's silence, the planner barking into her headset, the DJ asking if he should cut the feed. But I didn't look back. Some exits deserve to be witnessed. Others deserve to be final. As the heavy double doors closed behind us, Amaya whispered, Grandma, you didn't ruin anything. You revealed everything. And I believed her. The moment the ballroom doors swung shut behind me, the sound shifted. The violins and the chatter dulled to a muffled hum, replaced by the echo of my heels against polished tile. Each step away felt like laying down a burden I had carried longer than my bones should have borne. Amaya's hand was warm in mine, her small fingers clutching like I was the only solid thing left in a room full of quicksand. Don't look back, Grandma, she whispered, her voice too wise for 12 years. But I didn't need to. The chaos carried itself to me like smoke from a fire. Inside, the unraveling had begun. Sloane's shrill sobs ricocheted through the walls. You said she was just an old maid who gave birth to you. You told me she wouldn't matter. You said she'd stay in her lane. Jackson's reply was quieter, cracked. I didn't know she could. I didn't think she would ever fight back. Her mother's voice sliced next, sharp as glass. You let us host a six-figure event in a hall you didn't even control? You let your own mother hold the strings? What kind of man are you, Jackson? The guests, once neatly aligned in rows of politeness, now fractured. Some were leaving in huddled groups, silk gowns brushing past discarded napkins, polished shoes stomping over deflated balloons. A few lingered only to wag their heads in disapproval. One of my husband's brothers, Uncle Leon, the one with the cane, spoke loudly enough to be heard above the din. You let them treat her like a dishwasher at her own son's wedding? Shame on you, boy. And then came the ultimate humiliation, applause. Not for the bride. Not for my son. For the truth. For the moment I stood and refused to be erased. Phones were out, hashtags flying. The wedding that was supposed to be a polished fairy tale was now trending as a cautionary tale. Amaya tugged at me. Grandma, can we go home? Yes, baby, I said. My voice was steady, though my chest ached with the weight of 40 years of sacrifice snapping loose all at once. We're going home. The security guard at Anchor Hall, a young man whose mother I used to babysit when she worked the late shift at the clinic, opened the door with a solemn nod. Respect, Mrs. Parker, he said softly. They should have known better. I nodded back, unable to speak. As Amaya and I stepped into the cool Chicago night, the city lights blinked like small promises. Behind us, the party sputtered. Ahead, the streets stretched wide, open, waiting. Silence filled my house like an old hymn. No calls from Jackson. No messages from Sloane. Only the refrigerator's hum and Amaya's soft giggles in the evening when she stayed with me, filling the rooms with the kind of joy no inheritance could buy. On the third day, a knock came at my door. Not frantic. Not soft. Just hesitant. I opened it to find my son. Jackson stood there, his tailored suit gone, his shoes scuffed, his shoulders slumped. For the first time since he was a boy, he looked smaller than the world. "Mom," he said, voice cracked. "I let the screen door stay between us." "You never noticed the garden," I told him, nodding toward the roses I'd tended for 2 decades. "But they bloomed anyway." "I know," he whispered. His eyes were red, puffy from nights that hadn't brought rest. "I should have come sooner." "No," I said evenly. "You came exactly when your silence turned into consequence." He swallowed hard. "Everything is collapsing." Sloane's family pulled out of the catering contract. She's talking divorce. Guests are posting online. People keep asking how I could let it happen. It's all my fault. It is, I agreed. He winced. "I should have defended you, Mom. I should have told her to stop. I should have. You should have remembered who carried you across a flooded street without shoes," I cut in. "You should have remembered the woman who worked 4 jobs so you could go to college. You should have remembered respect." His eyes brimmed with tears. "I'm sorry." I studied him. The boy I raised was still in there, buried under pride and neglect, but apologies don't water roses. Actions do. "Apologies aren't about words," I said softly. "They're about how you treat people when you have the power to treat them well." He shifted, unsure if he was welcome inside. Amaya appeared behind me, her little hand slipping into mine. "Grandma," she said gently, "the tea is ready." She looked at her father, then at me. "Is he staying?" I looked from her to him. "Not yet," I said. "Some people need to remember what it feels like to be outside before they understand what it means to be let back in." Jackson's head dropped. He stepped back slowly, nodding. "When you're ready," he murmured. "No," I corrected, not unkindly. "When you're different." And I closed the door. That night, I sat at my writing desk with Amaya curled in the armchair beside me. The lamp cast a warm glow over the wooden box I had carried for decades. Inside lay the envelope, the verification card that had stopped an entire wedding in its tracks, and the original 1981 invitation, frayed at the edges but still shimmering faintly with gold ink. I took out a pen and began drafting my will. Every cent of my estate, every asset, every piece of Anchor Hall's legacy, I signed it all to Amaya. Jackson had forfeited more than inheritance. He had relinquished legacy. Amaya looked up from her book. "Grandma, why are you writing so much?" "Because," I said, smiling gently, "the future needs to be planted in good soil." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to reading. Over the next week, the scandal spread beyond Chicago. Not the drama, not the hashtags, not even the collapse of a wedding. What spread was the image of a grandmother who had stood her ground with dignity. Letters poured in. From mothers. From grandmothers. From women who had been laughed at, sidelined, dismissed. They thanked me, not for vengeance, but for visibility. For reminding them that silence can be broken, that respect can be reclaimed. In my garden, Amaya helped me plant a new rose bush. The variety was called Honor's Embrace. Pink petals, thorns thin as lessons. As we dug, she pressed her cold fingers against mine. "Grandma," she said. "You once told me we'd build something that lasts. I think we already did." I smiled, tucking the roots into the earth. "We built respect." I framed the old invitation and hung it above my bookshelf. Not for anyone else. Just for me. To remember that beginnings are worth protecting, and respect is the foundation of any true legacy. The card, the override invitation, I locked away. I didn't need it anymore. It had done its work. When the sun set that evening, Amaya curled up beside me with 2 mugs of tea she'd learned to brew just right. "Grandma," she whispered, "do flowers forgive?" "No," I answered softly, watching the roses sway outside. But they bloom anyway. And so would we. Winter thaw came slow to Chicago, brushing frost off rooftops and peeling ice from sidewalks one reluctant inch at a time. My bones ached, but I still rose with the dawn, same as I always had. That's what survival teaches you. Healing, whether in soil or in spirit, begins when you decide to stand. Every morning, Amaya and I tended the garden. We planted new roses in the corner bed, Honor's embrace, the ones with petals soft as silk and thorns sharp enough to remind you nothing beautiful grows without defense. She dug clumsy holes with a child's urgency. I patted the soil with a grandmother's patience. "Grandma," she asked one chilly morning, "you once told me we'd build something that lasts. Do you think we already did?" I pressed the last bulb into the soil, the cold earth biting at my fingertips. "Yes, baby," I said. "We built something stronger than a building. We built respect." Word spread about Anchor Hall and the wedding that stopped mid-toast. Not the gossip. Gossip burns fast and dies faster. What spread was the lesson. Women began showing up at my door. Some old, some young. Some neighbors, some strangers who had read about me online. They came with stories, whispered like confessions. A daughter-in-law who mocked a grandmother's cooking. A son who left his mother off family holiday cards. A niece who rolled her eyes every time her aunt spoke of the past. They said the same thing, over and over. "I thought I was invisible, but you reminded me I'm not." Amaya sat beside me while I read their letters, her small brow furrowed like she was carrying every woman's weight. "Grandma," she said one evening, "you didn't just save yourself. You saved a lot of them, too." Anchor Hall itself transformed. What was once just a rented venue became a living testament. Amaya started a community reading corner there, shelves of donated books, cozy chairs, space for mothers to feed babies, space for elders to tell stories without interruption. Every Saturday, she ran Story Hour for kids. When the local newspaper ran the headline, "Anchor Hall finds its true voice," I laughed softly. The hall had always had a voice. People just weren't listening until now. It was a gray Thursday when Jackson came back, not with apologies this time, but with a broom in one hand and a box of donated books in the other. "Let me help," he said quietly. I raised an eyebrow, wiping my hands on my apron. "With what?" He set down the books. "With building. With whatever you and Amaya are doing here." For a long moment, I studied him. Not the man who had stood frozen while his bride smeared cake on my dress, but not quite the boy I once carried across a flooded street either. He was something in between, a man trying to remember how to be decent. So I handed him a dust rag. "Start with the shelves," I said. And he did. No speeches. No excuses. Just quiet work, one book at a time. That night, when the three of us sat in my kitchen with mugs of tea, I didn't speak of the wedding. I didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore, it was rebuilding itself, brick by careful brick. One afternoon, a volunteer from a nearby senior center knocked on my door. She held a form, nervous in her hands. "Mrs. Parker," she said, "we'd like you to give the keynote speech at our upcoming conference on elder dignity. Will you share how you rose with grace when others tried to erase you?" I hesitated. I wasn't used to microphones. But I thought of all the letters piled on my table, the women who needed a voice strong enough to carry their stories. So I said yes. When the day came, I stood at a simple podium in a church basement. No chandeliers this time. No silk gowns. Just folding chairs, paper cups of coffee, and rows of women who knew what it felt like to be forgotten. I told them the truth. That I once thought silence was my safest armor, until I realized silence can also be a prison. That the card I carried wasn't power, it was an invitation to demand respect. That I didn't ruin my son's wedding. I revealed it. I ended with this. We bloom not because we cling to what we lost, but because we water what we choose to build now. There was no standing ovation. Instead, there were tears, nods, and women rising one by one to tell their own truths. That was better than applause. It was a chorus. One evening, Amaya came into my study with a sheet of thick paper still warm from the printer. She had redesigned my 1981 wedding invitation, the one Sloane once mocked. Same border, same calligraphy, same pressed flowers scanned into the page. But in the center, she added a new line. Respect is not a tradition. It is a condition. She handed it to me, her eyes steady. From now on, Grandma, I'll be the one to draw the lines of respect for you. You won your battle. Let me keep the peace. I framed her version and hung it next to the original. Past and present, side by side, both imperfect but both powerful. The seasons turned. The garden bloomed again. Children from the neighborhood filled the reading corner, their laughter spilling like sunlight through Anchor Hall's brick walls. One afternoon, a little boy tugged at my skirt. Grandma, he said, because all the kids call me that now, will you show us the rose you planted with Amaya? I led them outside, their tiny shoes crunching against gravel. They knelt around the bush, marveling at the pink petals. How can something so soft have thorns? One asked. Because, I said, kneeling beside them, beauty without boundaries doesn't survive. Respect is the thorn that keeps love blooming. They nodded, solemn as only children can be when truth fits into their small hands. Jackson kept coming back. Sometimes with tools, sometimes with books, sometimes with silence heavy but healing. He never asked me to forgive him with words. He tried instead with action. One Saturday, as he stacked folding chairs after story hour, he looked at me and said, I can't change what I didn't do that day. But I can spend the rest of my life doing better now. And maybe that was enough. Not redemption. Not erasure. But repair. At the end of the year, Amaya applied for a grant in my name, a scholarship for young women pursuing community development. She called it the Hearthlight Award. The description read, for the ones who build safe ground, even when no one sees. When she showed me the first flyer, I wept, not because I needed my name in bold, but because the light we lit in pain had turned into a beacon for others. Now, when I sit in my garden at dusk with a mug of tea and Amaya's laughter echoing through Anchor Hall, I think about that wedding. About the cake sliding down my chest. About the silence of my son. About the moment a grandmother said, enough. People still ask me if I regret it. I don't. Because weddings are meant to be beginnings, but no beginning lasts if it's built on rot. I didn't ruin my son's wedding. I gave him a chance to rebuild his life on truth instead of illusion. And as for me, I am not a woman who fades quietly into the background. I am a woman who learned that dignity doesn't need a spotlight, but it deserves a seat at the table. Amaya often curls against me at night and asks, Grandma, did we win? I kiss her forehead and whisper back, no, baby. We didn't win. We grew. And growth, after all, is the only victory that lasts.